And so being young and dipped in folly, I fell in love with melancholy. Salutations, brothers and sisters, and as you might have guessed from the opening quote today, we are going to discuss the title character of the Witcher saga, at least one of the two, and one of the two main characters as well. One of the best fantasy characters out there, in my humble opinion at least. A notorious witcher from the north, the Butcher of Blaviken, the White Wolf, Geralt of Rivia himself. Now, as previously mentioned, Geralt is the titular character of the entire saga, and indeed was the first character created by Sapkowski in his first short fantasy stories. The reason why Sapkowski created the tale in the way he eventually did is quite amusing actually. In an interview he made with Eurogamer, which I will link to in the description so you can go and read it yourself, it's actually quite an intriguing read. He says that he was frustrated with the common fantasy cliches of having a nearly anonymous regular Joe with basically no skills or training or often even a plan perform legendary, incredible feats such as defeating dragons or demons or saving entire royal houses from destruction. He specifically mentions the famous Polish story of the Krakow dragon, a beast slain by a common cobbler who poisoned a sheep with sulfur and made the dragon explode after he ate the sheep. Sapkowski found most of these allegorical tales frustrating for following reasons, and I quote, "Poor cobblers make good shoes, they don't kill monsters. Soldiers and knights? They are idiots, generally. And priests only want money and to fuck adolescents. So who's killing monsters? Professionals. You don't call poor cobblers apprentices to kill monsters, you call for professionals. So then I invented a professional." And this probably sums up how Geralt started out, a man with no name, if you will, traveling from place to place, subverting common fantasy tropes and spicing up classic Slavic fairy tales with more modern, mature and pragmatic ideas. Sapkowski likes to claim that after publishing his first Geralt story, Wiedźmin, which simply translates as The Witcher, he had no intention of writing a new tale, but allegedly the success of the book in the growing Polish and Central European fantasy community convinced him to write more and more, initially without tying individual stories to each other and simply, what should I say, creating them as homages slash satires of classic fairy tales. It's quite intriguing when you read some of the first short stories in which Geralt figures, because you can clearly see what Sapkowski was going for in terms of the renamed and rebranded characters, because they are still the classic stories of the Beauty and the Beast, or the Cursed Princess, or the Krakow Dragon even. But they are twisted and turned in a somewhat amusing way actually, and used to tell an arguably deeper story. Like you can argue about whether the stories are truly deeper or just taken from another point of view, but that's probably a story for another day. Eventually, however, piece by piece, Geralt grew from a random monster slayer to a fully fleshed out, complex character, with a rich, if ever so slightly mysterious backstory. But enough talk about behind the scenes stuff. I will be sure to dedicate a separate episode to that particular topic at some point down the line. Now, let's start profiling. Geralt the Witcher, also known by most men as Geralt of Rivia, was born to the sorceress Visena and a mercenary named Corin in an unknown year. His parents became acquainted when Visena was sent by the druids of the Mayena Circle to apprehend a renegade named Fregenal, a mage of considerable talent who had stolen an experimental spell. with which he created an insectoid monstrosity called Koszcie in Sapkowski's stories. Anyways, with his new pet, Fregenal formed a mercenary band that terrorized a small frontier region, pillaging and raiding with the aid of their tamed abomination, and generally being a nuisance to the entire region. Along the way, Visena met Corin, a handsome young mercenary traveling the world, who took a liking to her and decided to stick around despite her initially cold attitude towards him. However, after he helped her defeat the renegade druid and, more importantly, the gigantic stony crab spider summoned by said renegade, Visena began to appreciate her new companion, and after an unknown period of time she managed to appreciate him enough that she bore him a son. We are not sure what exactly happened next, however, but one thing you need to remember is that sorceresses aren't supposed to have children. And I mean that in the strictest of terms. Most of them are barren and physically incapable of having children. Now, whether this is purely biological or whether it has something to do with their respective training and lifestyle is a topic I will delve further into in the up-and-coming magic video, but safe to say, Visena's sudden pregnancy surprised no one more than her. That might explain why she would eventually abandon her son, leaving him first at the Temple of Melitele in Elander, from where he was later taken to the old Witcher fortress, Kaer Morhen. Her exact motivations for doing this are unknown. Some say this was her way of getting rid of an unwanted, unexpected nuisance. Others suggest that maybe she was coerced by other mages and druids into abandoning him, and yet others believed this was fate, once again guiding her hand. Either way, she abandoned the boy and only ever saw him once again, even that more or less by accident. It is unknown what Corin had to say about all this, whether he even knew she had a child, or if he was still alive by the time his son was born. Safe to say he never reappears in the saga, and being a regular human, it is safe to assume he probably is no longer alive when the series starts. When the boy was taken from his home, he was still very young, and for the longest time he had no memories of his biological parents. His name, Geralt of Rivia, was given to him by his new tutor, Vesemir, since young witchers were encouraged to pick new names for themselves, preferably names that had nice ring to them. Little Geralt later even went to great lengths to ensure that he had a Rivian accent, despite having no real knowledge of Rivia and only visiting the land on very few occasions. The young Geralt then endured the same gruesome, painful and inhumane training conditions imposed upon all the young Witcher apprentices, and managed to survive long enough to undergo the Trial of the Grasses. His trial was one of the last performed in Kaer Morhen, and is said to have been exquisitely painful, due to several additional mutations he underwent thanks to his outstanding performance during training, which bleached his hair to snow white in the process and granted him additional skills and mutations which most Witchers did not possess. However, aside from this nasty side effect, he emerged from the trials in peak conditions, becoming a fully fledged member of the Witcher Guild, and was set out on the path. Few people, most likely including young Geralt himself, knew just what a name the young Witcher would eventually make for himself. When Geralt was leaving Kaer Morhen, his head was full of amazing ideas, dreams of glory and honor, of killing dangerous monsters and saving innocent people from all manner of beasts and dangers, and receiving praise and gratitude for his deeds. And then, not 50 miles from Kaer Morhen, he came across his first monster. His first monster was bold and had terrible rotting teeth, and was leading a band of marauders who had just ambushed a merchant and his daughter on the road. The monster was dragging a small, terrified girl who couldn't have been older than 12, while telling her that it was time she found out what a real man was like. Geralt, who seemed to appear out of nowhere amidst the marauders, repeated those very same words to him as he swiftly cut the bandit leader literally in two. The other bandits fled, yet when the triumphant young Witcher turned around looking for the merchant, he saw that the man ran away too, and when he tried to reach out to the little girl he had just saved, he saw she was now covered in the blood and guts of the marauder chieftain, and consequently she vomited and then fainted. This was a stern wake-up call for Geralt, who suddenly realized that he was even more terrifying to most people than the evils he would defend them against. From this point on, he would do his best to avoid unnecessary conflict whenever possible. Now, I will quickly describe Geralt's appearance and skills. He is fairly tall, very muscular man with a sharp jawline, feline eyes, and most notably, long snow-white hair, usually tied in a knot or headband. Additionally, in the games, he sports a prominent scar across his left eye, and even a beard, which in my opinion really suits him, so prepare for a nice survivalist beard if I ever decide to do a Witcher 3 Let's Play. Apart from this, he uses fairly standard Witcher equipment, 2 swords, preferably light armor, a hunting knife and a dagger in his boot, and a large variety of potions and poisons which he uses interchangeably for both drinking and coating his weapons. A final addition to his appearance, however, is his horse, or more specifically, horses. Geralt has ridden presumably hundreds of horses throughout his lifetime, but they all bore the same name, plotka, a diminutive word for a common roach fish in Polish. This is because Geralt often changes his horses on his journeys, and so has developed a fairly utilitarian approach to his steeds, trying not to grow very emotionally attached to his mount. He prefers mares, which are less impulsive and more easily controllable, and indeed, plotka in Polish is a gendered word, and is a kind of endearing expression actually. Still, while every horse he ever rode bore the same name, Geralt does have a preferred type of horses, and has even shown some affection for a few particular roaches during the books. One other interesting thing which I always found hilarious on Geralt personally, because I share this with him absolutely 100%, is that he also hates portals, since he oft witnessed the rather grisly results of failed teleportations in his youth, and, to quote him, places the numerous assurances of the absolute 100% reliability of portals under the same umbrella as expressions such as "my dog does not bite," "my son is a good lad," "I swear the liver's still fresh," "I will return the cash in 2 days at worst," "he's just a good friend," "all I care for is the good of the realm," and "answer a few questions and we will set you free." This quote of his actually speaks to a lot more of his personality in general, but we'll get to that in a moment. He also distrusts magic in general, and especially magicians, which is incredibly ironic since a good half, or at least, of his romantic partners, the ones we know of anyway, were sorceresses of the highest caliber, no less. He also once defeated a knight in full plate armor, unarmed, simply by making him hit himself with his own sword, all in a matter of seconds. Almost 80 years have passed by the time we meet Geralt of Rivia for the first time. By this time, the Witcher has already become something of a living legend, being one of the last surviving Witchers in general, and definitely the most famous one, of the ones still alive, though his name was only known in certain circles, and was not always regarded kindly. He was commonly called the White Wolf, or Gwynbleidd in the Elder tongue, owing to his origin as a School of the Wolf Witcher and his distinct hair color. When we first meet Geralt, he has been hired by the Temerian king, Foltest, to complete a very specific, delicate mission involving a Striga. Strigas will get their own video, probably combined with others, similar monsters, but for now, all you need to know is they are unliving abominations of flesh, fury, and terrible dental hygiene, with a taste for biting people's heads off and generally using the unfortunate locals as chewing toys, whose only weakness is good old-fashioned sunburn. The specifics of this operation I will for now leave out, but even during our first encounter with Geralt, we can see there is more to him than meets the eye. First of all, Geralt is a professional, who will do everything in his power to complete a contract he has accepted and will not take the easy way out of tough situations even when he is not obliged to do so. He is patient, calculating, and ruthlessly pragmatic, and we can see throughout the story he is running circles, sometimes literally, around the unfortunate creature that was, up to this point, described as a nigh-on unstoppable killing machine, being on a roughly equal footing with the xenomorph in terms of deadliness. And the best part? He does not even use swords. During the entire story he does not cut the Striga once. Instead, he uses his spells, skills and smarts to outmaneuver and defeat the monster, even if he receives a wound at the very end of the duel when his guard is down for a moment. Another thing we learn about Geralt during the story is that he's no stranger to ruthless actions, if he deems them just, that is. For example, when a man tries to kill him, and Geralt later finds him guilty of one more, particularly distasteful crime, he has very little problems with simply using the unfortunate criminal as bait for the hungry Striga. Geralt binds the man next to him until dark, and then cuts him loose and tells him to run, knowing full well that the man won't make it to safety in time. But he will give Geralt the time to catch the Striga off guard. Already, Geralt proves to be ruthless and unforgiving, not hesitating to dish out justice if he finds a man guilty of a crime. In latter stories, however, particularly the ones involving Dandelion, we see there is a lot more to Geralt than a merciless monster slayer. He proves to be, kind of unintentionally, decently versed in literature, poetry, law, and commerce. He is able to tell you a lot more about monstrous species than merely how to kill or incapacitate them, since he is very well read on the biology of monsters and humans alike. He can read most people and their intentions very quickly and accurately, and, most important of all, he is at his core a good person. To elaborate, Geralt doesn't like to think of himself as a good person and will deny it at every opportunity he gets, and he has good reason to do so as well. During his career, he does quite a few things we would consider bad, immoral even at times. Those are just the events we know of. The thing to always remember with Geralt is that, despite his appearance, he is almost 100 years old by the time we meet him for the first time, and he has seen more things, mostly bad and horrible things, than many people can even think of. Hell, he probably did a few of those things himself. It is heavily implied throughout the books that, though never outright stated, that Geralt once was an idealist, and that during that part of his life he committed something he is now very ashamed of. His cynical and sometimes downright pessimistic nature are a constant feature in every single book, and even when he is happy, he keeps a very down-to-earth, reality-based approach in all matters. This tells me, personally, that once upon a time he was a very different person, and that age and experience had slowly but surely made him into the grizzled veteran he is today. This, on the one hand, makes him very hard to fool or provoke. On the other, it sometimes really makes him sound like a whiny emo, even when you get where he is coming from. He sees everything in shades of grey, suspects everyone's motives and actions, and is slow to trust and even slower to change his mind about most people. And what really hammers this home is his sense of humor. To say that Geralt is sarcastic is like saying the Sahara Desert is dry. It's basically true, but it doesn't even remotely capture the scope of said truth. Geralt's dry, ironic sarcasm fills almost everything he says, ranging from mild jabs to fully fledged insults, laced with a heavy dosage of truth to add salt to the inflicted wounds. He is one of those most gifted amongst men, in that he almost never is lost for words, even in situations which scarcely call for humor. This also helps him always anticipate what comes next. As I already mentioned, he has a remarkable ability of accurately deciphering people's intentions, But this ability goes a bit further beyond that as well. For example, when he is invited to a very special banquet full of wizards, spies, politicians, and what might charitably be described as celebrities, he sees right through all their seemingly innocent small talk and proposals, and he succeeds in pranking one of the most clandestine, well-informed organizations in the world with hilariously little effort. His foresight, however, can sometimes also blind him, usually when facing an enemy who is also trained in the subtle craft of manipulation, and this has in the past backfired on him quite horribly, and indeed he owes his life many times over to good old Lady Luck. Despite this, or more likely because of this, Geralt is usually a man of few words, the strong, silent type. While his wit is sharp and his tongue is barbed, he is no great speaker, and if at all possible, you should not entrust him with sensitive diplomatic missions, as when he does eventually speak up, his words are blunt, straightforward, and to the point. He's also extremely good at offending people, even the most thick-skinned ones, which is another quality that has earned praise of the readers and the ire of the characters. Come to think of it, Geralt would actually do really well in modern internet wars. Yet Geralt has, by the time we meet him, become everything but an idealist. Far from that, he has removed from his mind any illusions about how the world works, and has accepted his place in it. A place of a relic from a bygone age, just doing the job he was bred to do until something nastier, meaner than him comes along to end his life. This is perfectly described by Geralt himself in a conversation he has with another member of a dying species, a band of rogue elves. Quoting, "I manage because I have to, because there is no other way out. Because I've overcome the vanity and pride of being different. I've understood that they are a pitiful defense against being different. Because I've understood that the sun shines differently when something changes, but I am not the axis of those changes. The sun shines differently, but it will continue to shine, and jumping at it with a hoe isn't going to do anything. We've got to accept facts, elf. That's what we've got to learn." His no-nonsense, do-what-has-to-be-done attitude can also make him seem quite cold and distant, and he most certainly can be ruthless with his enemies. As demonstrated with the Striga bait example, he has little issue with dispensing what he deems just punishment against those who deserve it, and despite his own better judgment, often takes upon himself the role of judge, jury, and executioner. There is also one point in the book where he slaughters a group of bandits, whom he could have easily avoided, but weeks of pain, frustration, and fear he had to endure up to that point caused him to simply snap and murder the unfortunate marauders with extreme prejudice. He rarely lets his enemies walk away to fight another day, and is slow to forgive even those he knows for sure have tried to change or atone. All of this might make him sound like a remarkably unpleasant, even a cruel person. After all, what kind of a man sees the world in such dark colors, if not the one who paints it in such? Who would be so cynical, so ruthless, and so clinically brutal, but a man bereft of his basic humanity and common decency? The truth, however, could not be more different. Under the extremely gruff, scarred, and dull exterior, Geralt is actually a very sensitive, emotional person, who often has a hard time expressing his true feelings and ideas. Now, this might very well sound super cliché, and it kind of is, if I'm being completely honest, but it goes way deeper than your classic Beauty and the Beast stereotype of a lover trapped inside a monster. Geralt's main issue is not that he doesn't know how to express himself. In fact, he's surprisingly kind and gentle many times throughout the books. It's that he's afraid to do so. For decades, Geralt has spent his time on the fringes of society, and has learned to expect and take for granted ingratitude, insults, and even violence from most of its members. In such an environment, the best and only way to survive is often to become what society wants you to be. And if a society wants you to be an emotionless professional killer for hire, that is what you shall become. Even so, Geralt has a profound sense of honor, not unlike the code of chivalry he personally doesn't think very highly of. He frequently risks money, mission, and even his life to help people in need, even men who quite blatantly do not deserve a second of his time, much less his invaluable help and possibly his life. And so why does he help them? Even so, even knowing that he will be lucky to receive any kind of compensation, and that the people he defends often deserve what's coming for them. Because, as hard as it is for the White Wolf himself to often believe this, Geralt very strongly believes in doing what's right. It's why he frequently breaks his rule of staying neutral. It's why he almost always exposes himself to unnecessary risks. It's why he's not afraid to lie to his employers about fulfilling his contract if he deems it fit. Because you see, in Geralt's mind, doing what's right basically boils down to shielding the innocent. Whether those innocents are his friends, his rivals, or even monster species, which pose no real threat to anyone and are willing to simply live out their lives quietly, with their heads down and not bothering anyone. He rationalizes this away as simply doing what is necessary to eliminate the threat, and, naturally, if there is no threat, there is no need to eliminate anyone. And since every man has to eat, even as infrequently as Geralt, he often decorates the truth of the matter so that his employers are willing to part with their coin, even if the contract was not fulfilled in the manner they expected. If there was one quote which perfectly describes Geralt and one short story in general, it would be the story of how he got his second infamous moniker, the Butcher of Blaviken. In this story, titled aptly The Lesser Evil, Geralt is approached by two old enemies, both of whom try to convince him to kill the other, invoking the principle of lesser evil and claiming that he will be saving innocent lives if only he kills the other. Geralt's response to such a proposition really summarizes his nature better than 1,000 words ever could. Quoting, "Evil is evil. Lesser, greater, middling, it matters not. Proportions are relative. The line is blurry. I am no pious hermit. I haven't only ever done good in my life. But if I am to choose between two evils, I'd rather not choose at all." And even though later in the story he does eventually spring from inaction, it is not the pleas and threats of the two old rivals that make him act, but rather a desire to prevent the loss of innocent life. The story really is my personal favorite out of the initial short stories, and is part of the Last Wish collection, so definitely try and give it a read. He's also extremely loyal to his friends, often going out of his way to support them, even in matters that are not really that important and cause him nothing but additional problems. And friends, he has quite a few. In this, he always reminded me of Batman, actually, the one guy who always works alone. I'm sorry, that was a terrible Batman impression. But yes, the guy who always works alone, air quotes, and yet has more sidekicks and friends and allies than most other comic book characters combined. And Geralt also has a habit of making some very interesting and powerful friends. Some of his closest buddies include characters like a powerful druid, a renowned dwarven mercenary, a Skelligan Jarl, several other witchers, 2 Amazon warriors, a reformed vampire, a freaking golden dragon, a Doppler, and one extremely useless, effeminate, whiny, and an overall sad waste of space that could generously be described as a poet. And speaking of Geralt being the Batman of his universe, he has, despite his hard outer shell, a magnetic personality, which makes him especially popular with the members of the fairer sex. Seriously, for a guy who always complains about society not accepting freaks and mutants, He is one hell of a monster in the sack, and has quite a few affairs in pretty much every story he appears in. What you see on screen before you right now is a simplified list of his most notable old and new flames. All I can say is, pick one, because damn. Yet despite all this, Geralt only ever truly loved two people, both of whom we are going to talk about extensively in their own videos. Two women, one a girl and one a lady, who managed to peel away the hard crust that covered the White Wolf and expose his soft underbelly. Only two people in the whole world who truly made him express his emotions, such as kindness, insecurity, and even grief. And for these two women, he was willing to achieve something quite literally impossible, guided forward by the slimmest of chances that his mission may succeed, and all the while knowing that of his two loves, one probably betrayed him and the other was probably dead. And yet, presented with overwhelming evidence supporting both of these things, and facing impossible odds of crossing thousands upon thousands of miles of war-torn enemy territory with no weapons, no supplies, no horse, and no clothes to speak of, all the while limping, might I add, he still chose to follow the tiniest sliver of hope that he had. Why, you ask? Because after he met these two women, he knew his life would have no further meaning or purpose without them. And that, ultimately, is Geralt's true nature. A selfless, humble, and a fairly loving man, wearing the guise of a stubborn, suspicious, cynical killer. Geralt is not a monster, no matter how hard he may wish to be one at times. He is just a very, very old man who has seen a lot in his life and was let down more than a few times, often by himself. So, what does Geralt ultimately want in the story? The short answer, family. The long answer, he wants to save the one person he had come to call his daughter from mortal peril, as well as from letting her become like him. And in this process, he himself becomes less like his old self, and in a way, by the end of the tale, he finds forgiveness of a sort, though not in the way he expected. He is a very complex and nuanced character, and I hope to God Henry Cavill does a great job portraying one of the most iconic Slavic characters in the fantasy world. Yet Geralt did not just develop these qualities on his own. He had a good, patient, skilled teacher, one of the best there were, and a master of his craft, a skilled warrior, a patient hunter, and an expert tracker, but most importantly, a person Geralt could one day proudly call father. But that is a story for another day.
At the end of the path, I rest my weary feet. At the end of the path.